and we're going to talk about IRAs and Roth IRAs, just the general overview here, and it should not be taken as personal tax advice. We do encourage you to seek a professional who can review your personal situation. So let's go ahead and get started, Roy.
Very good. Well, good morning. We want to thank you for joining us, and what we're going to be talking about here is pretty much pictured on the umbrella. We're going to be talking about retirement type accounts, Roth IRA, simple IRA, traditional IRA. We're also going to go into some of the employer plans like 401k, SEP, and 403b. And we're not going to go into them exhaustively. It's just an overview so that you're kind of aware of what these things are, and when you hear the word Roth or traditional or standard IRA, different things like that. So the IRA is kind of, or the Roth and the 401k and the SEP is really a covering. It's kind of an umbrella over an account that's underneath it. The account that's underneath it can hold stocks, bonds, it can be a savings account, a bank even, or a mutual fund account that you may have. But each one of the plans, the Roth or the traditional or the 401k, each one of those has different tax situations, implications. So, and they don't all fit. Some you can't use unless you're employed. Some you have to have so much in earnings. Some they're all different. So let's go ahead and just give a quick review. Employer-sponsored plans are like your 401k, and a lot of people have heard, oh, I got a 401k, and they used to say that it's now a 201k. But if you were, depending on what happened to it, through 2008, it may have taken a hit, but should be back at this point to where, at least where it was before then. 403b is for government nonprofits. It's kind of an annuity type plan. You got a 457b that's more for government. The SEP is a simplified employee pension plan. It can be used by a sole proprietor or an S corporation or a C corporation. You have a simple IRA. It's the plan that you can set up, especially for a company that has less than 100 employees. Then there's defined benefit plans where a person who's going to retire is to receive a certain benefit. It has to be funded. You've got actuarial responsibilities and everything with that. Then a defined contribution is where instead of the benefit being set, the contribution is set, the money that's going into the plan. Then you have the ESOP, which is an employee stock ownership plan where the employees own the company. Example of that would be Publix as a employee-owned company. And then you have profit-sharing plan, where the company puts so much of the profit, that percentage, and there's an allocation for the employees. And then on the individual side, you have the individual retirement accounts. You have a traditional IRA, which has been around for a number of years, at least 15 or so. And recently, within the last 10 years, Senator Roth came up with the Roth IRA. And then you can also, and these require earned income. And you can also have a spousal IRA. And then under the other category, we have the HSA Health Savings Account. Now that may seem a little different. Why is that underneath a pension or a retirement account? Well, that can be a very beneficial item toward your retirement, because unlike an FSA, you don't have to spend all the money that's in it, and you don't have the some of the restrictions under ERISA because it's not an ERISA plan.
What's an FSA?
FSA is a flexible spending account. In other words, you allocate so many dollars for that account at the beginning of the year to be spent on medical. But if you don't spend it, you lose it.
Okay. So what's ERISA?
ERISA is the Employee Retirement Income Security Act that goes back, about 15 years ago at least. That kind of regulates your pension plans and things like that.
Okay.
There's a Form 5500 that has to be completed for a lot of the bigger plans, which is why a lot of small employers don't use it, because of the cost that it takes to do the 5,500 and all the compliance issues. Of course, anything with the government is never simple.
So in the employer-sponsored plans, the employer and the employee can both contribute to that. But the individual retirement plan, that's just the individual's personal account. No employers can contribute to that.
Correct. The simple IRA that's listed under employer-sponsored plan, the employee can contribute and the employer can contribute. And since it is an IRA that's owned by the individual, when the employer contributes, the employee is vested 100% in what the employer put in.
And what does that mean, vested?
Vested means you own it. In other words, if you quit, you take it with you. Okay, where a lot of like your 401k plans, they have a vesting schedule in there, and they can vary. Some are like 5-year vesting that you vest 20% every year in what the employer puts in.
Mm-hmm.
You're always invested in what you vested in what you put in the plan.
Right.
Okay. So after the first year, if the employer put in $1,000 into your account, if you were to leave, you could take $200. Okay. The employer keeps the plan keeps the $800 in it, and depending on the plan document, the $800 either comes out or stays in there, gets shared by the other plans. Okay, now let's take a look at what's underneath the umbrella, and that we can put in stocks, we can put in bonds, savings accounts, mutual funds. We can do gold and real estate, but we're not going into those here. That's kind of a different area. When we talk about stock, we're talking about common stock or preferred stock. For example, here's a picture of the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad Company, the old B&O Railroad. Now, I like railroads, so. But the B&O, if you owned 10 shares of B&O common stock, you would get a certificate back in the old days. Now they just recorded that you own it.
Okay, so what exactly is a stock? Like we see this
owner.
as a paper, but what does it mean?
It's a piece of paper that represents your share of ownership in the corporation. Now, years ago, before the SEC was in place, companies would, some companies issued more stock than where they had available equity in the corporation. And there was a lot of fraud that could go on because there was no way to track it. Nowadays, you don't have that issue. The SEC has a lot of rules and restrictions on what's going on. But your stock, the stock you own is a percentage, large or small, of ownership that you have in that corporation.
Do you always get a certificate?
No,
like that?
not anymore. Not anymore. The certificates are kind of gone. They have, with everything being electronic, when you buy the stock, it's kind of your broker or whoever, or the mutual fund company, or your account has a record of your ownership percentage, and they keep that. And that's why it's important to make sure that you have a trust company or a trustee in the mix. You don't want to have something like Madoff where you pay your money to Madoff and he never bothered to buy the stock. He just kind of invested it in his own personal stuff. So, but it is ownership. The second thing we have, everybody, I think, especially if if you're a little older, you may remember the savings bonds, Series EE. And now they're even electronic. You don't get the savings bonds anymore.
And what is a bond?
A bond is a debt instrument. By a debt instrument, it means you put up, let's say, for example, you put up $50, you're going to get so much interest over a period of time. With government savings bonds, you may get by a $25 bond, but it only costs you $18.75, and when it matures, you get your $25. So the difference between the $18.75 and the $25 would be the interest. Now, we also have treasury bonds that are large amounts that mutual funds can buy, and different things like that. But it is debt of either the federal government, it can be a corporation.
So they're borrowing money from you.
They're borrowing money from you.
You don't have ownership in it.
Correct.
They're just borrowing money that they have to pay back to you, like you're the creditor.
You're the creditor, right.
And are they guaranteed?
The government savings bonds are guaranteed. They are pretty safe. That's why, as far as an account, if you have government bonds in it, you will get your money back, but the problem is inflation eats them up.
Right.
Okay, because the interest that they pay is less than inflation. Now, they do have some that are called TIPS, Treasury
inflation protection
protected securities, or series. And those kind of adjust for inflation, but since it's the government, they play with the inflation numbers and all of that. So.
But it would be considered like your most safe money.
Yes, most safe money.
Minus inflation.
And inflation's going to get you, but it's safe. You will get money back. The other area is a savings account where you can go to a bank and you can open up your open up an account, put $100 in it or whatever their minimum is, and either add to it or just leave it there and you collect interest on it.
So you can have an IRA that's just a savings account.
You
don't have to actually have it invested in stocks or anything, but you're still going to have the same problem with inflation.
Inflation's going to get you, okay? And then, as we alluded to here, we're talking about mutual funds. And mutual funds are where a group of people pool their money in a fund, put it under a manager, and the manager then buys securities, i.e. the B&O Railroad stock, for example, that we showed in that other one. But it could be, you know, any company out there that's on one of the exchanges, okay, where it's publicly traded, and the fund manager will buy those securities with the goal of getting a return, and that return goes back to the investor who can either spend it, okay, or they can invest it. Okay. So one of the questions that we have is, should I Roth or not Roth? And you may have wondered, which is better for you, a Roth or just a traditional IRA? We're going to take a look at the differences between the two so you can better understand them. Well, a traditional IRA is a retirement account where the contributions to it are tax deductible. Now, the limits are $5,500 if you're under 50, and 50 and over, $6,500. They let you put in an extra $1,000 because you're closer to retirement. And one of the things that the government's concerned about is that seniors are under invested as far as retirement is concerned. So they give you an opportunity to put in an extra $1,000.
Which is called the catch-up contribution.
The catch-up contribution, yes. So if you hear putting in the catch-up contribution, that's the extra $1,000. Now, you get a tax deduction for the traditional IRA. And this was the first IRA that they came out with, was where you could set up a tax-deductible IRA account. And you could fund it with $6,500. But you had to be employed. Your income your IRA contribution could not be more than your income. So if you only made $3,000, that was your limit on your IRA that you put in there for tax deduction. Now,
what does tax deferred mean?
Tax deferred means that you're not going to pay tax on the income that's generated, hopefully the income that's generated inside the IRA account. So in other words, you put in $5,000 and that's all you add, and 5 years from now it grew to $8,000. That $3,000 difference is not going to be taxed until you take the money out, and then the $5,000 plus the $3,000, the gains, will all be taxed at ordinary income rates. Now, when you get to retirement, there's a required minimum distribution. So you don't have to take it all out at one time. If you take it out before 59.5, you do have a tax penalty of 10%. And then you do have to count whatever you take out and put it in income.
Right.
Because you took a tax deduction for it all when it went in there. And I've had the question where, well, my IRA went down, can I write it off? Well, you wrote it off when you put it in there.
Right.
Okay, so you've got a tax deduction for it already. So the only time you pay income tax on it is when you take it out. Now, a Roth is a special type of tax advantage retirement account where you don't receive any tax benefit up front for making a contribution. You get no deduction for what you put in it. But The main benefit of this account is that if you hold it for more than 5 years, the gains can be withdrawn tax-free along with the basis, okay, the money that you put in to start the account. Now, the question which you have to look at with this, and the contributions limits on this are the same as for the regular IRA. The difference between the two is that this one you get no tax deduction for it when you put the money in, and you don't pay tax if you left it in there for 5 years or more when you withdraw it. Now, the penalties are rough on this if you do withdraw it. But,
so if I have a regular IRA and I decide, well, I would rather do a Roth because I'd rather not get taxed later, can I do that?
You can do it, but you have to be careful in what you're doing with these things, because you can do what's called a Roth Conversion. Okay, what you're doing is you're taking an account which you took a deduction, your traditional IRA, you took a deduction for that, so that money has not been taxed.
Right.
So if you do the conversion, if you do the conversion and you are moving that money from a tax deductible account to one that's after tax. So it's before tax going to after tax. Uncle Sam wants the money.
Right.
Okay? Now, when you do the conversion, you don't have the penalty if you're under 59 and a half.
Okay.
That's the advantage of the conversion.
Okay.
The problem you have is that you have to pay the income tax on that in 1 year.
Okay.
Or the year that you make the transfer for whatever the amount is.
So you have to pay the tax on how much you got the deduction for your basis and any gains?
Yes, because traditional, you wrote the whole, your basis in the traditional is pretty much zero. Okay, now there's some exceptions. So that hasn't been taxed. So you've got $100,000 in there and you say, well, I want to move that to a Roth. So you move it, convert it, do the conversion to a Roth. You now have $100,000 that's added to your income. No penalty because it's a conversion, but you will report that $100,000. That means if you're in the 25% tax bracket, you're going to pay $25,000 in tax just on that conversion.
So, obviously you can do a conversion, but who is a good candidate for a Roth conversion?
What you have to look at is the level of income of the individual in the year of conversion, because the conversion is going to shift all this income onto the 1040, the personal income tax return. They're going to pay tax on it. Is it going to force them into a higher tax bracket, and do they have enough time to recoup the principal that they're losing by the time they retire? Okay. So we really want somebody who's in a very low tax bracket. Might be somebody that's, say, unemployed, lost their job. It could be a possibility. Somebody who is young. If they're young, it could be worth doing it. But you have to look at each situation. That's why this is just a general overview. Because if you don't look at all the areas and the different plans, because they all have different requirements, different restrictions.
So some things we would have to consider would be taxes.
Yes, it seems unfortunately we always have to consider taxes. That's why we do the tax planning. Now, because the question is what will the tax rates be when I need my money? Because these conversions are taxed at ordinary income tax rates. And you don't want to take the money out of, especially if you're under 59 and a half. I've got $100,000 in my IRA, for example, okay? I want to convert it to a Roth. I'm in the 25% tax bracket in this example. That's $25,000. Where you say, well, I'm 45 years old. I've got enough time to recoup, get my principal back. I'm going to do this. And I'll take the $25,000 for the tax out of my IRA. Because that $25,000 coming out of the IRA is not part of the conversion. You now have a 10% tax penalty on the $25,000, that's another $2,500. That $25,000 also adds to your income, so now you've added $125,000 to your income, okay? And you're only winding up with $75,000 going into the Roth. So Uncle Sam does not mind you doing it. Why? Because they're getting their tax up front.
Right.
They're not having to wait.
And as far as the tax rates, you know, considering what it's going to be when you actually need the money, I think what I've seen here is, you know, during the time when people are working and they have their families, and in those years, they're usually in a higher tax bracket than those that we have that are retirees. So if they're doing the Roth, they're paying tax at this higher tax rate, but they're going to get their gains and everything will be tax-free later. But those that have a traditional, they got the tax deduction when they made the contributions, and a lot of them end up with little or no tax consequence now because they're in such a low tax bracket.
At retirement, right. So you look at it like, so for the example we were just talking about, a person who's in the 25% tax bracket. That means that for every $1,000 that you're putting into your IRA, Uncle Sam's paying $2,500 because you're using before tax money on that. And also that money is working for you, okay? Whereas if you had $1,000 to invest, but you had to pay $250 in tax on it, you got $750 going into your Roth. You got an extra $250 that's growing for you over a period of time. Now, if you're in the 0 or 10% tax bracket, a Roth would probably be your best way to go. The other consideration with
well, if you started with a Roth and then you ended up being in a higher tax bracket, could you then open up a traditional and stop contributing to the Roth?
Yes, you can. Each year stands on its own. So you can look at any particular year. Okay, you have up until April 15th to fund it. I have even set it up, but it's got to be done by April 15th. Even if you put your tax return on extension, April 15th is the deadline for the IRA. Okay.
So we should look at the time horizon that you have to pay off that conversion,
right.
And then also the regulations.
Well, you know, anybody that's been around for a number of years knows that the tax law does not stay the same.
Right.
Okay, it's a living document and it's growing. It's getting, you know, bigger and bigger.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that the government isn't going to change the rules of the game? Do you think that down the road it will stay tax-free the way it is?
Well, I mean, recently they were talking about taxing the 529 plans, which these are like savings accounts for kids to go to college, and they're already trying to tax that.
Yeah, and
so
well, unemployment used to be exempt, Social Security used to be exempt, government bonds used to have no effect on income. Now they have effect, and they can do the same thing with the Roth, especially as these accounts grow and more money gets there. Uncle Sam always seems to need tax money.
Right. So they have the right to change that.
Oh, they always have the right to change it.
Well, why don't we look at just a side-by-side comparison of the two?
Well, you can see on the left the Roth IRA characteristics that the contributions are not tax deductible. They're done on an after-tax basis. In other words, you pay tax on the money. They appreciate tax-free or tax-deferred, and there's no limit as long as you can make the contributions, okay, as to how long you can make the contributions. So you can make them, you know,
every year. If you're 80 years old, you can still make them?
You got to have earned income.
Okay, for earned income.
Earned income, not investment income.
Right.
So if you've got, you know, $30,000 in investment income, you can't make it contribution. It's got to be earned income, i.e. W-2 or Schedule C from your sole proprietorship, or it could be W-2 at a partnership. There's no taxes assessed on the qualified withdrawals provided the account's been open for 5 years and the owner is 59.5 or older. The 59.5 is the trigger for the penalty. Once you're over 59.5, there's no penalty. And you do not have a required minimum distribution on these accounts at any age. You're not required to take the money out. And it also doesn't have an effect on Social Security or anything like that when you do withdraw the money because it's tax-free. reported as income. Currently, traditional IRA, they're typically tax deductible. The contributions, mitigating factors include your age, your income, whether you're covered by an employer retirement plan. They do have an effect, or can have an effect, with income limits and what have you, if you are in an employer retirement plan. And the contributions are done usually on a pre-tax basis, though sometimes you can wind up making contributions you can't deduct, which then gives you basis in the IRA. You can only contribute till you've reached age 70 and a half. You've got no income restrictions, though deductibility depends on several factors. When a distribution is made, all pre-tax contributions, dividends, interest, and capital gains are taxed as ordinary income. On this one, you do have to start taking withdrawals at age 70 and a half. Once you pass 70 and a half, you're going to have to start looking at taking required minimum distributions, which is a percentage of the December 31 balance in the account. Now, one thing we failed to mention is the spousal IRA. If you have a situation where the one spouse is the breadwinner and the other spouse stays at home, takes care of the kids, the spouse that stays home and takes care of the kids, that does not have earned income, can count the earned income of the primary breadwinner, okay, and use the income that they don't use on their IRA as a spousal IRA. So, for example, the breadwinner makes $5,000, doesn't do an IRA, doesn't have a retirement plan. The spouse non-working can do a spousal IRA and put in $5,000. If they make $20,000, both could do the full IRA.
Right.
So there is that. If the non-working spouse, there are situations where they can get the actual tax deduction, even and for money put into an account on their behalf, even though they don't have it. And the question is, should I convert? Well, it's always prudent to seek help from a qualified coach, tax person, in making decisions like this. There are pitfalls. There can be innocent mistakes that really can't be corrected.
And there's a lot of variables, especially like on the traditional, if you're covered by a 401k at work, your income level, how much can you contribute, how much can you contribute that's tax deductible. So you really need to sit down with a CPA or someone that's qualified to look over all those factors. So this is Jennifer and Roy from Smart Plan Jupiter. Roy is a CPA and investor coach. So if you have any questions about today's presentation, we welcome you to give us a call at 561-744-9547 or visit us on the web at www.smartplanjupiter.com. Any final thoughts?
You need to have a retirement plan of some sort in place, especially if you're young, because the one thing you have on your side is time. Put money away, because government probably is not going to take care of it. You've got to do it on your own. Yeah.
We have a webinar coming up soon that's going to be, what are you waiting for? Just talking about the compounding of, interest. And,
there you go.
And that's real. I think when people see that when you start early, investing often, that they can reach their retirement goals.
It can be done, and I'd rather have some money for retirement than depend on just my Social Security check. And in order to do that, you've got to use some of these retirement vehicles. You can maximize your 401k. And then the new thing that's coming on is the HSA, which we didn't talk about, but that can be a retirement type of thing. Then you get a match in some of these. There's all sorts of things to look at.
Yep. So if you have any questions, give us a call. Again, that's 561-744-9547. See you next time.
Take care and be blessed.